Hello and welcome to another VMK in the game development series. In this VMK, I'll be sort of cleaning up the code that we've developed so far. I've noticed that things are starting to get a little bit out of hand because we're dumping all of our code into one project. So in this VMK, I'm going to show you how to split up the existing project into a couple libraries so that it's a little easier to handle. This will allow us to break up the code a little bit further so that we can have like a math library, we can have an object library and things like that, which we can then reuse for other projects later on. I have received a few requests for people asking if I could make a series on two-dimensional graphic engine, so something like maybe Mario Brothers or a side-scroller. Well, as a matter of fact, a lot of the code that we've written so far I could reuse to make this second engine. So I decided to start breaking things up into libraries so that I can later on reuse a lot of this code that I'm making now. Now, before we do break things up into libraries, I do want to make a few changes to the scene class as well as the triangle and the house class because I don't really like the way that it's structured right now. We're doing a lot of passing of variables through functions that is really not necessary. So we're going to go and clean that up before we go and create all these libraries. So if you find my video tutorials helpful and you'd like to support my website, you can do so by going to www.maticknows.com and you can click on any of the advertisements from Google, or you can donate some money using the PayPal icon. Let's begin by taking a look at what we have. Currently we have one project called Game Engine, and in it we have all these classes, and all the classes have been broken up into folders here. And within the folders, I sort of tried to keep a certain structure in my mind. Now that we're going to be breaking these up into libraries, I'm going to rearrange some of these things, which is going to require a little bit of work within Visual Studio as well as within Windows itself, just to move all these files around to their appropriate locations. So before we do that, though, I want to make a couple changes to the scene class, the triangle class, and the house class. Now let me show you what I mean. If we take a look in the scene under update, here we're calling update every time in the frame, and you can see what we're doing is we're taking the triangle, which is labeled here ground, and we're rendering it. But when we render it, we pass in which renderer we're using. And then for the house, again, we do the same thing. We pass in the renderer and so on. So what we're doing here is we're passing in this renderer, but in reality the renderer is never going to change during runtime. It's only a one-time setting that should happen in initialization. So instead of doing this, I want to rewrite these render functions within these classes so that we don't have to pass anything in. Instead, we can just do this. And it will automatically know that which renderer we're using. So to do this, what we need to do is go into the triangle as well as the house class and create a member variable that's going to store which renderer we're using, and in the constructor we're going to specify which renderer we're going to be using. So let's do this first for the triangle. Let's open up the triangle here, and I'm just going to put this right at the very end. So we're going to need the renderer. I'm going to take it out of the render function here, and I'm going to put it in at the very end of the constructor, like this. And doing this means also we need to create a member variable here for the renderer, and I'm going to make it private since we don't want the user to be able to change it, like this. And now in the constructor we just need to initialize that. There's the constructor, and we need to add it here as well. Okay, so that should be all the changes we need to make. Oh no, there's one other thing here now. In the render function, we no longer are passing anything in, and instead we're using our own member variable to choose which case here to go into. So I think that should be all the changes we need to make for the triangle. Let's see, okay, that built successfully. Now let's make the same changes to the house class as well. So again, I'm going to take it out of here, put it in at the end of the constructor, and we need to add a member variable, private one. And in here, we need to add it in. And then we just modify the render function. Okay, let's check to make sure that that builds okay. We got a problem here. Alright, now that we've made the changes in the classes themselves, let me just compile the house. Okay, house is okay. We now need to also go into the scene, and in the initialization we need to pass in the renderer into all the constructors. So now here at the end we need to pass in mRenderer. We have mRenderer already saved for us because within scene we store this member variable. So we're just passing this member variable into each of the constructors for these new instances that we create. And as a matter of fact, I can just copy this and paste it in at the end. I think that's all of them. Let's test it out. I missed one. Okay. Let's just run this to make sure everything still works. Okay, we still have everything working. Great. Okay, now we can begin to split our code up into libraries. Now, the way that I have the library, or the way that I have the code structured right now is, let me go into Explorer here, and we see when we build something, it automatically creates this debug folder, and inside this debug folder is where our executable gets created, as well as all the sort of object files and everything that gets compiled in between goes into here. We have our main, our core, and so on. These are all our individual files for all the CPP and .h files that we're using. And you'll notice that every time we run the program, this log gets created in this directory. So it's not really nice. Instead, what we're going to do is I'm going to create a directory here, and I'm going to call it build. So anytime we build something, it's going to go automatically into this directory, and it's going to create a debug folder here. And then in that debug folder is where the executable is going to sit. So that's going to get rid of one of these problems. Now the other thing I want to do is I want to move some of these things around. We're going to be making 3 libraries in this VMK. One library for math, one library for objects, and the last library for the scene. So the way that we're going to split them up is like this. I'm going to go and create I'm going to just rename this math to MathLib. I'm going to rename scene to scene.lib. And the other one is going to be ObjectLib. So I'm just going to create a new folder here and call it ObjectLib. Now, I'm going to delete this log.txt file because it's no longer going to be created there. And I need to move some of these files in these folders around. Main's going to remain the same. Core is going to remain the same. Error handler, I'm going to take error handler out of its own folder and put it inside core. And delete error handler. Game OpenGL is going to remain the same. Math.lib, I'm going to move some things around here. I'm going to take everything except for vector out of this folder. So I'm going to take the triangle and the vertex out. I'm going to put both of those into the ObjectLib. And under Scene, I'm going to remove House from here, since that's really an object, and I'm going to put that under Objects. And let's see, so Math has just Vector, and ObjectLib has House, Triangle, and Vertex, and Scene contains the camera, the player, and the scene. Now the other thing I want to change is Math here, or not Math, the object. I have Vertex, but I want to rename this to be Vertex 3, just so it's a little bit more descriptive. So I'm going to have to go into the code as well and change that to be a class called Vertex 3 instead of Vertex. And that's going to cause a little bit of a problem because everywhere where we use Vertex, we're going to have to relabel it as well. Okay, so we've got the general organization of all our files now. Go into Visual Studio and start moving them around here as well. Now, we took Air Handler and we put it into Core, so I'm going to do that, and we're going to get rid of the Air Handler folder. And let's see, the game engine project will no longer contain Math, so we can take Math out completely, and it's not going to contain Scene, so we can take that out completely. Okay, so all that the game engine now contains is Color OpenGL, Air Handler, Game OpenGL, Windows parameters, a couple global functions just for WinMain, and these 4 enumerations. Everything else is now going to be created in a library, which is going to get linked in to our main project here. Let's begin with the Math library. So under, we can right-click on Game Engine here and go Add, we click on Solution and we go right-click Add New Project. And under New Project, we want to select Win32 Project here, and then under the project settings, we're going to choose our Game Engine, and under Game Engine, we're just going to place our MathLib in this folder, which is going to go eventually into MathLib here as well. So we're going to call it MathLib. So you see it's going to go under the Game Engine into the MathLib folder. Click OK. And then under Application Settings, we want to create a static library with no precompiled headers. So click Finish. And that creates this empty project for us. We can delete the README file. And we can go into here now and look under MathLib. We see it's created the project file and the text file, which we can delete. Now, we're going to go in and add to here. We want to add an existing item, this vector 3. Now, for this math library to work, though, we need to have a CPP file here. So we're going to go and create a new item, a .cpp file, and just call it the exact same thing we called vector, so vector3. And in it, we're just going to paste the following. So it's just a simple CPP file that just has an include for the .h file. And in this .h file, we now have to go and make sure that everything within here is structured correctly. Let me just do a quick skim through. Okay, everything here looks fine, so we should be able to just go and compile this. And okay, it's complaining because it can't find sine and cos. And the reason why I can't find that is because we need to include stdafx.h, which has our math.h files that have sine and cos. So up here we can just, actually not here, but in the .h file. .h here. At the top here in the includes, we'll just include stdafx.h. Okay, let's go and try to compile this to make sure it works. And we're still missing something. Oh, okay. It's saying it cannot open stdafx.h, and that's because we haven't set up any paths yet in this project. So if we right-click on this and go to Properties, we get the following. Now, the output directory here is selected to be debug, but we don't want it to be debug, we want it to be _debug. And the reason why I do this is because I don't want this directory to get lost in other directories in this folder. So instead I put an underscore because that'll force it to be at the very top of the file. So for instance here, you notice debug showed up, but for instance if we were to go back here, debug is at the top, but if I didn't put an underscore here, debug would show underneath core. So it's kind of like in between other files, and I don't like that. So I put the underscore in. It's just a personal habit I have. Now, under C++ here, we need to have some additional include directories. And the include directories for that stdafx file happens to be, let's see, if we're in the MathLib, we have to go up one directory, and then we need to go into the main. So we can just go in here, we go up one directory, and then into main, and then that should be able to find stdafx.h for us. The librarian currently is going to output mathlib.lib to the output directory, which was specified here to be debug. Well, I don't want it to go there. Instead, I want it to go up one directory, into the build folder, and then into the debug. So again, what it's going to do is, from here it's going to go up one directory, into this build folder, and then it's going to create a debug directory in here where that library is going to end up sitting. Okay. So that should be fine now. Let's see if we can compile this, and let's see if we can build it. Okay, so it's built now, and if we take a look, inside here we have the debug, and here's our MathLib. So that looks okay. The other thing we need to do, though, is we need to set up some dependencies now. Since this project is going to depend on this math library, we need to make sure that the math library always gets built before we go and try to build this executable. And the way we can do that is under projects, under build, we have an option here called, let's see if I can find it. Where is it? Oh, sorry, it is under project. Under project dependencies, under the dependencies tab here, we can select game engine. That's this one here. We want game engine to depend on math library. So by doing this, it's going to force math library to be built first, and then game engine to be built second for us. Okay. The other thing I forgot to do while we're in here is if we right-click on game engine and go to properties, and under linker, we now have to go under the input and select that we're going to include mathlib.lib, since that's where all the math code is going to sit. And the other thing we need to do is under additional library directories, here we need to specify that directory for where we find that lib. And that's going to be located under, let's take a look here. For this project, we start here, we got to go into the build folder, into the debug, and that's where it's going to be. So we can go into the build folder, into the debug, which happens to be this, and that's where it's going to sit. Now the other thing we can change here as well is the linker here for our game engine is currently going to output GameEngine.exe to the output directory. We don't want it to go to the output directory because that's going to put it inside the debug folder here. But that's not where we want it anymore. Instead, we want it in this build folder under debug. So we can go in, and here we can type build slash, this is going to be debug, and then that's where it's going to go. Alright, okay, so I think that should be it for the math. We can do a clean. We can clean the build, so clean the solution. And, well, if we try building it now, it's going to complain because we're using scenes and we're using triangles and vertices, but we haven't included those other libraries. So there's no point to build it yet, but that should be everything we needed to set up for the math library. Now let's go and repeat the process for the other two libraries we're going to create. Next one we're going to do is let's do scene.lib. So again, we right click here, we go to add new project, select Win32 project, and again we're going to navigate to our game engine directory, click OK, and here we're going to specify SceneLib. Click OK, and then under application settings select static library with no precompiled headers. Click finish. Get rid of this readme, go back up here, and SceneLib, here's our readme that it just created for us. Okay, now in here we can right click and go add existing items, and we're going to add in those three classes, the camera, the player, and the scene. Okay, and well, let's see if we can build that. I guess before we build it though, let's go into the project settings for now the SceneLib, and we got to change some things in here as well. The librarian, we want it to go into build output directory SceneLib. We want to include SceneLib inside the game engine. So under linker, under input, right here, you can go and add scenelib.lib, and we need to specify that new directory as well. Where was that? Under input, additional dependencies, here it is. Additional library directories. Alright, this is already set up. So we're in SceneLib, we specify it's going to go here, so we don't have to change it again because we're already looking in that folder for us, for all the libraries. So that should be okay. Click OK, and let's see if we can build this library. And again, it's missing the stdafx.h because it doesn't know where to look for it. So under project, properties, C++, general, additional include directories, we have to specify, okay, let's think. And we're in the SceneLib, we got to go up one directory and then into the main. So up one direct into the main. Okay, let's try this out. So again, just try building this. And there's something else that's now missing. Can open game OpenGL.h and core.h. Okay, because those two files are in a couple other folders, so we have to go and include those in the project as well. So under here, core.h was under core. And add that in here. Core. And the other one was game OpenGL, and that was under game OpenGL folder. Okay, let's try that. And we're still missing something. Okay, now it's asking for triangle.h and vector3.h. Those ones are now going to be located under the ObjectLib folder. So let's go and add those into the project dependencies. Okay, and and try this build it again. And still something else. Vertex.h and vector3. Vector3 is in math, and vertex.h no longer exists. So we have to change this to vertex3. And did we actually do that? Yeah, we changed it here, but we haven't actually changed the class yet, so this is going to give us a problem. But we can go in and add the project path to the MathLib. Okay, so I think this should do it. Try building this. Oh, there's another vertex here missing. Okay. Now the last one is our ObjectLib project. So again, we can go in here, add new project, and under here we'll select Game Engine, select the name and change this to ObjectLib, and again static library with no precompiled headers. ObjectLib, remove this README file, and remove this. And we can go in and add those folder or add the files. Oh. Add existing item, and well, let's first try to build it, and then we'll correct the vertex 3. So let's see what's missing here. Cannot include stdafx. So under additional directories here, we need to include, what was it, main? Vertex has been renamed. And core is missing, so we need to include the core directory. And what else are we missing here? Color OpenGL. This is under game OpenGL. Okay, that's fine. Now the last thing we want to do is also make these new libraries dependent in Game Engine. So under project dependencies, Game Engine, we want OpenGL-lib to be dependent and SceneLib to be dependent as well. And also under project properties for the Game Engine, under linker input, we want to make sure we include the ObjectLib.lib. Oh, lib. Okay. I think that should be it. So let's go and do a clean solution. So that's going to delete all the files that we don't need. And we can go in here and clean up this debug. We don't need this. And under build debug, we should see nothing. I'm just going to put a capital D there. Okay. And under all these debug items, they should be all empty now because we just did a clean. So let's go and do a clean build. So you'll see now what it's going to do is it's going to go and build each of the libraries, and at the end it's going to link in all the libraries into GameEngine.exe. So first thing it did is it did SceneLib, and that was okay. Then it did MathLib, that was okay. ObjectLib was okay. And when it was doing Game Engine, there was an error. and the error was in error handler.cpp. If we take a look here, we can delete this, and we can delete this. The reason why we need to delete those is because those existences were looking for error handler in the error handler directory, but remember we moved it to be in the core directory. So we need to go in here and go add existing item from the core. Let's just select both of them and select that .h file and just move it into core here. That should correct this problem. And what's wrong now? Triangle. Cannot find triangle. Triangle has been moved, so within game, in-game engine, we now have to tell where this triangle.h file is located. So under project, game properties, C++, under here, we need to make some modifications. So under math, we change math to MathLib. We changed scene to SceneLib. And we also added ObjectLib. And we can delete this since that doesn't exist anymore. Okay, I think that should be okay. Save this and let's try building it. Okay. Cannot open file SceneLib.lib. Let's double check to make sure it's okay. SceneLib.lib is not in here, which means we must have forgotten to change the linker settings. SceneLib build. Oh, there should be 2 dots and into the build. Okay. That should fix that, and let's double check object. Object we never set up properly, so let's go and copy this and change that path here to this. Okay, so we're missing those 2 other libraries files, and the reason why we're missing them is because they ended up getting stuck into here, which is not where we wanted them. So let's go and delete this. And as a matter of fact, we can delete this debug folder. We don't need it here. Same thing with ObjectLib. And let's just double check the math. This was okay. Okay, let's try building it again. Still cannot find SceneLib.lib. Let's see. Under build, oh, the debug, those 2 got put into the wrong debug folder. Let's delete that and fix that again. Project properties, under here we forgot to put an underscore. Click apply, and we need to put that same underscore for scene.lib. So you notice there's a lot of little details. But once you set these up once, we won't have to worry about them because everything should be located in the proper spot. Okay, it succeeded. Yay! Okay. Let's just double check here in the debug folder. Okay, we now have those 3 library files which we just created and the executable file. So now when we go and run, that's the other thing we need to change, is when we run, we want to run from this directory. We don't want to be running the project from this directory. And all that's going to do is it's going to change where that log.txt file is going to show up. Before it was showing up in this folder, but we're going to now move it. So under project settings for the game engine, under debugging, we want to set the working directory. And we can set it to be _build / what was that command? Debugging / build. Okay, I think that should do it. So let's try to run this. And okay, it's still running, that's good. And if we go back into here and take a look under the build directory, we now see the log is created in this folder, which is good, and it doesn't show up here. So that cleans up that little problem. Now this debug folder will still show up, but it's not going to contain any of the important files because all of the important stuff gets dumped into this build debug folder now for us. The last thing we want to do is go and change the class called I guess I should mention this. Now that we've split up our code into these 3 libraries and the executable, we see we now have a grouping here. So our game engine still contains all that stuff, and now our math has its own grouping, our object library has its own grouping, and our scenes has its own grouping as well. Now we want to go and change vertex, and I just want to rename it to be vertex 3. So up here I'm going to go and change the define to be vertex 3, and under the code, this is already changed here. So the only other thing we need to do is do a global find and replace for vertex and replace it with vertex 3. Vertex 3. And I'm just going to do replace all. Click OK. So there's 140 occurrences that got replaced. Hopefully we didn't replace something that wasn't supposed to get replaced. And the other thing I want to change here is because our member variables here is just labeled x, y, and z. I want to actually change them to be fx, fy, and fz, just so it's more descriptive for me, so that I know that these are floating point numbers. And that's going to cause a little bit of a problem, because wherever we happen to be using vertex, we were using m underscore x. Well, now we have to change it to be m underscore fx. So again, we can do just a global find for m underscore z, and we'll replace this with m underscore fz. Didn't find any. Well, let's try building it and they'll complain, and we'll find them all that way. Oh, right. We replaced vertex with vertex 3, so wherever we had vertex 3, now it's going to be vertex 33. So we got to go and correct that. Vertex 3 is fine here. Vertex 33, that's not fine. This is okay, okay. Let's try building this. Okay. So here's all the locations where we happen to be using m underscore x when we should really be using m underscore fx. Replace. 78 occurrences. And do the same thing for y. Oh, we take y, replace it with mfy. And we do the same thing with z. Okay. Save all that and let's try building. Okay, it looks like there's some more occurrences. Oh, we got some more of these 33 problems. So I just have to delete one of these 3s. A little bit tedious, but again, we'll only have to change this once, and then hopefully I decide to stick with the organization so we won't have to make all these changes in the future. Let's try this. Oh, I got some more 33s here. guess I could just do a find and replace for GL vertex 33 to be GL vertex 3. That might be a little faster, but okay. That seems to be it. Now let's just do one last clean solution. Clean everything up. Double check everything here that it's empty and that we don't have any extra files in locations that there shouldn't be any. Okay, that looks fine. And let's do a build. Okay, so that should be it for splitting everything up into libraries. So in the next VMK, I'll be adding an object into the ObjectLib, and in the following VMK, we'll be adding lights into the SceneLib. And as we start adding things, these library files are going to be growing bigger and bigger. Eventually, we'll be adding more math functions into the math, and if we start getting more complex, if people are interested, we'll add additional libraries for sound and for network and things like that. So again, if there's things that you want to see me put into this game engine, just send me an email and I'll work it in when I have time. So hope you enjoyed this VMK and come back for more.